And now I have the great honor to introduce her. One company that took to dominance after a tumultuous decade has emerged as the world's only large-scale producer of separated rare earth materials outside China. And it's my great pleasure and our great pleasure to welcome the woman who navigated that path, overcoming incredible challenges, technological, regulatory, financial, and market challenges to create one of the critical minerals success stories of the last decade. That person, Amanda Lacaze, I'm so sorry. Amanda Lacaze is the CEO and Managing Director of Lynas Rare Earths, the world's only scale producer of separated rare earth minerals outside China. So Lynas is an environmentally responsible producer of rare earth materials, which are essential to facing future and green technologies, including electric vehicles, electronics, and wind turbines. The company operates the high-grade Tier 1 Mount Weld resource in Western Australia and a proven processing facility in Malaysia. It's building 500 million rare earth processing facility in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia, and is planning to construct a heavy rare earths and light rare earths separation facility in the United States on the Gulf of Texas, and I assume we're going to hear more about that. Amanda was appointed CEO in June of 2014. Again, it's wonderful to see such a dynamic CEO as a woman leading a company that's so transformational, and it just emphasizes the point I made that having diverse people around the table leads to amazing outcomes. Amanda has successfully led the company through a challenging turnaround. Early in her career, Amanda developed deep management and marketing experience, which led to positions across many industries, including telecommunications, agriculture, and FMCS. She was recognized as CEO of the Year in the 2018 Mining News Net Awards and in 2021 and 2019. She was named in the Australian Finance Review magazine's Power List as one of the 10 most powerful corporate leaders. Amanda is a board member of the Minerals Council of Australia and a member of Chief Executive Women and the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So we are so honored to have you here, and we so look forward to your talk. Please join me in welcoming Amanda to the stage.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know, I'm an Australian. And in Australia, it is customary to begin our speeches by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work, and meet. In Lynas's case, our operations are on Wongatha land in Western Australia. Here at Princeton, I would like to pay my respects to the Lenape peoples, past and present, and their continuing presence in the homeland. So, today's theme combines three of the dominant megatrends in global discourse: changing geopolitics, climate change, energy transition. They could all be the subject in any topic sentence, couldn't they? And if you went to any global event and you were playing word bingo. Do you play word bingo over here? Well, we do in Australia sometimes when we're at particularly boring events, so I'm hoping no one's doing it this morning. You would score a bullseye for every one of these, changing geopolitics, climate change, energy transition. So my view is, after years of somewhat silly debate, there is now general acceptance that human activity is affecting the Earth profoundly. And in particular, it is leading to changes in the Earth's climate. This is not surprising. We are a species in plague proportions on the globe, yeah? And it is doing everything it can to expel us, yeah? And so if we want to survive, we need to think about how do we change, because ultimately our actions could lead to the Earth no longer being the Goldilocks planet that supports ours and other life forms. Not long ago, I heard a geologist explain this in the simplest of terms. And he said, billions of years ago, our planet was like Mercury or Venus, hot with an atmosphere full of CO2, unable to support life. The development of microbial life forms converted that CO2 into carbon-based deposits. The result, the transformation of the Earth's atmosphere to one that could support life as we know it. Then over the last 200 to 300 years, and you think about that in the billions of years continuum, we've been using those fuels at pace and progressively releasing back into the atmosphere what took billions of years to lock up. And I thought that that was a really great way of describing it and very accessible for people. But as this is a learned audience, I must disclose at the same event another geologist rebutted the theory and suggested humans were only responsible for about 3% of the measured climate effects. Either way, the risks associated with the changing environment are now generally accepted, and the recognition that we should transition to less damaging energy sources is also generally accepted. And whilst the pathways to the broad adoption of alternate technologies are technically and economically challenging, we're good at solving for those challenges. I'm a glass half full sort of a chick. You probably would have worked that out by now. I actually believe in the incredible innovation of human beings. When we think about this and we think about, you know, just 2 years ago, who would have expected that we would have one effective vaccine against COVID, much less 5 or 6, right? When we decide, and particularly when you in America decide to do something, then it gets done effectively and quickly, right? The big problem is, as I think one of your presidents said, America can usually be relied upon to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted all other options. So we'd like to get there a little faster this time, please. So we have no single technology or energy source that easily replaces the fossil fuels on which we have depended over the past 2 centuries. But we do have a smorgasbord of options, and we're getting better and more efficient options at speed. For example, windmills, the latest GE windmills, a single turn of the blade generates enough electricity for a household for a full day. Pumped hydro storage options, and dare I whisper it, nuclear. It's one of the issues that I think if we can get people to have more scientific conversations, we can bring in alternatives that may have become more politically challenging over the past few years. Rather more challenging than the technology, I think, are the social implications of energy transition. Energy, along with education, is one of the critical enablers to improved outcomes for individuals and communities. Ensuring equity between developed and less developed nations will be a continuing feature of the transition. But I guess the reason today's theme is the changing geopolitics of climate change and the energy transition is that today's global order presents challenges which in many ways are more difficult and more complex than any of the technical or economic challenges. Whilst it seems the world is on board with the need to transition, recent events have shown the fragility of global supply chains to support that transition. So, if you listen to the introduction, I hate introductions. I got asked, did I roll my eyes? And I did, because those of you who are interested in me can look it up online, and those who aren't were just, put to sleep before I came to start to talk. So I am the CEO of Lynas Rare Earths. We mine and produce separated rare earth oxides, Because I think I'm mostly speaking to an audience of scientists, you will know that these are on the periodic table, atomic number 58273, the lanthanide series. These are valuable because they are reactive metals. And in the 15 rare earths, some of them have optical qualities, so the original colour televisions were given their red and green colours using rare earth materials. Some of them are catalytic. Every ICE vehicle on the road today has a cerium in the AutoCAT system that converts the carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide. And then the sexiest of all today are the magnetic materials, which are used in the motors that either, there's a few people here in the audience who can remember winding down car windows and pumping brakes and those sorts of things. They're all driven by small electronic motors these days. And of course, our famous, electronic products, none of those would work without rare earths. These are often known as the vitamins of industry because their special properties help to improve technologies. And they are essential to all the technologies that enable energy transition and to modern manufacturing, jobs and economic development, which remains important. We are the only non-Chinese producer of these materials, which offers us a unique insight into the geopolitics of supply chains and the potential effects of government policy. So just to give you a little bit of your view on this, this is our Mount Weld mine. Our Mount Weld mine is 865 kilometres northeast of Perth in Western Australia. What's there? Not very much. Our local town has 300 permanent inhabitants. Our workforce is 100% fly-in, fly-out. This is the tier one for those who are not geologists, and I think geologists got a bad rap in, Big Bang Theory. We're not, my geos don't all look like Bert. But geology is, it's really exciting, the geology of our mine. It's an ancient volcano. It's been dated to be 2 billion years old. It would have been about 3 kilometres higher. It's weathered over time. And so we have this carbonatite pipe. And what we're mining at present is the enriched saprolite layer, which is the richest known deposit of rare earths in the world. I was there on Wednesday. I'm going to do a bit of name dropping here. It was so cool. We had the American ambassador to Australia, Carolyn Kennedy, come out and visit us. And we were walking along a 28.5% seam of rare earths. And so the high-grade nature of our mine really is an important part of our success. So tier one means high grade, tier one also means long life. So it's over more than 25 years mine life, and we continue to explore. We're going down. Last year we sunk a drill hole down 1 kilometre. I was talking to the driller and I said, he did it in 3 weeks where it was originally scheduled for 2 months. And I said, that was pretty fast. He said, it was competent rock the whole way. All right. Bugger me. I wonder what incompetent rock looks like now. Seriously. So this is our feedstock. We then process that at the world's largest single rare earths processing facility in Malaysia, in Kuantan. And so you can see this is our facility. So in mining, what are the skills that we need? We need geology, and we need chemical engineering. Of course, we need electrical and mechanical engineers everywhere. But we come here and really this is a big chemical plant, right? And it is a big, complex chemical plant. There are 3 stages. It's not, and here, the Chinese know how to separate rare earths. There had not been a successful plant built to separate rare earths outside of China until Lynas for the previous 30 years. And you know what? The Chinese weren't big on sharing their IP, go figure. So we had to learn to do it ourselves, and it is complex. So we have a first phase, which is cracking and leaching, where we actually remove the rare earths from the surrounding iron phosphate material. The second stage is solvent extraction. Now, for any of you who are chemists or chemical engineers, you might know that, say, something like nickel or uranium will go through solvent extraction. Generally, that will be somewhere between 6 and 13 phases. At our Malaysian facility, we have 943 solvent extraction phases. That gives you an idea of just how complex it is. And as a university student, Chris shared a room with who used to be my head of operations. And Cam did have more hair when he started running this plant than when he finished. But it is a big, complex, we have had to learn these things ourselves. That's going down, isn't it? Oh, thank goodness. She's got this timekeeping thing there, and I thought, I have not spoken for 27 minutes, so that's good. And then we go through a product finishing stage and ship it out in big bags. We're also building a new facility in Kalgoorlie. I know that that's a little bit tricky to say, in Western Australia, and you can see this is really very exciting right now. So we have a look at, I can show up here, this, which is the kiln through which we run the concentrate, is the second largest kiln in the Southern Hemisphere. So I could wax lyrical for a long time, but really, key points: you can't have any of our modern manufacturing or, sort of new technologies without rare earths, and we're good at doing it. We know stuff. So that's a technical term. So, as I said before, our global supply chains for many materials have actually proven to be quite fragile. And to put this in historical context, we didn't get there overnight. The challenges that we face today with our global supply chains have been decades in the making. It's only a few decades ago that we had an implicit comfort with the concept that manufacturing and other activities should be located in the best fit locations. That globalisation strategy saw rapid outsourcing of manufacturing to East Asia. And this was embraced with alacrity by Western governments and Western consumers, who happily put themselves on the heroin drip of cheap components. Yep. It's even a decade ago, we still had great optimism that the rules-based global order would persist and strengthen, and that as China developed economically, it would also adopt the key precepts of the Western rules-based order. And today, we are reaping the harvest of those actions and expectations. Even 6 years ago, the words supply chain were rarely heard, at least by businesses like ours, despite our important place in global supply chains. And I'll offer as an interesting insight into this. In November 2017, I was at a meeting at the Pentagon. Just to be really clear, the US Defence Force cannot go to war without rare earths, and in particular without heavy rare earths. At present, we separate light rare earths in Malaysia. All heavy rare earths are actually separated in China. So the US goes to war, it's reliant upon one of the 4 non-aligned states for one of its key inputs. Is this really smart? No. So I was at this meeting, and the US government had put a tender out for materials to stockpile. And so we'd actually, put in a response to that tender. And we had lost that tender to a Chinese trader, so the DoD had decided to buy it from a Chinese trader instead. And for the sake of $750,000, it was cheaper to buy it from China than it was to buy it from us. And I just looked at this guy and I said, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. You know, I mean, $750,000 in the US defence budget, it's not even pixie dust. Right, so that sort of started a conversation that we've been having with the US government now for some time. But why now? Why all of a sudden are people talking about supply chains where they haven't previously? The first is that I think there is a shift in the political order which started that thinking. No, I shouldn't say that. In 2018, Trump did manage to get consensus in China, in Washington on China. It's about the only consensus thing that he achieved, I will say that. And that's when rare earths started to get more attention. And all of a sudden, we at Lynas were the prettiest girl at the dance. I like that. The pandemic then reminded us of the fragile nature of global supply chains. And probably more importantly, the speed with which nations retreated to protect their own national interests, which in some ways was quite shameful, I think, as a human. The speed with which we said, well, I'll just look after myself and bugger the rest of you. Sorry, that's an Australian term. I don't mind what the rest of you do, might be a nicer way to say it. But that speed with which that happened was really quite, I think, alarming and surprising. And finally, why now? Because of the rapid growth in the technologies that will allow us to address climate change, and they require new fit-for-purpose supply chains. So these three drivers brought focus on the famous critical minerals, a term which has been used off and on for decades. We were walking along looking at one of the buildings today, talking about the challenges of asbestos. At one stage, asbestos was on the critical minerals list. So critical minerals only got prominence in 2018 when it was published. The first one was published here under Trump, and US President and the Australian Prime Minister issued a joint statement. They did another 13 joint statements before anything was done. So what you may ask is a critical mineral? Well, essentially, it's materials where supply is important, but where supply is concentrated in places we don't much like. Right? Iron ore is a really critical material for future-facing industries, but it's not on the list. Why not? Because it has a broad supply base and a lot comes from friendly countries like Australia. By comparison, rare earths are on the list, not because they are particularly rare, but because supply is mostly from China. It would all be a bit funny if it wasn't so serious. I hear Western governments speak with such indignation about the dominance of China, but China didn't make any secret about what they were doing. 1992, Deng Xiaoping said the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths, and we're going to make this part of our economic revolution. And for 30 years, they have executed a disciplined plan leveraging their raw materials for downstream development. What China does is not about the jobs in the resource, it's about the jobs in magnet making, motor making, automotive industry, right? And that's all part of the economic material. So for us at Lynas, geopolitics have both challenged us and created opportunities. In 2011, there was a famous rare earths crisis. At that stage, there was no Lynas, and that was a product of a geopolitical issue. The Chinese and the Japanese were having a bit of a tiff over the Senkaku Islands, and the Chinese threatened to stop export of rare earths to Japan. You cannot have an automotive industry without rare earths. You cannot have an electronics industry without rare earths. What are the two peak industries in Japan? Automotive and electronics. So the reaction to that circumstance was really interesting. The EU set up a think tank to understand rare earth supply chains. The US launched litigation in the World Trade Organization because, you know, you're really good at suing people. The Japanese funded Lynas. Who do you think today has secure supply of rare earths? Yeah, exactly. So Lynas and a US firm, Molycorp, were born out of the rare earth crisis in 2011. And not surprising, we had the best deposits of these materials at Mount Weld and Mountain Pass in California. But there was limited expertise on how to process these materials, and as I said earlier, the Chinese weren't sharing IP. So times were very tough as we struggled with learning to process and deal with the pressure that was being heaped on us by the Chinese with sustained low pricing. To put this in perspective, the price for NdPr today is about $90 a kilo. Through 2016, the Chinese kept the price sitting at around about $29 to $33 a kilo, which basically meant that only those of us who were in the bottom cost quartile could survive. Molycorp went into Chapter 11, as it relied on a purely capitalist model, whereas the Japanese held our hand very closely that entire time. And we survived and actually went on to reach nameplate capacity, to debottleneck, and now we're looking at expansion. But frankly, we survived because we had the support of the Japanese government and because we were operating in a low-cost jurisdiction in Malaysia. And we were able to sit out the Chinese. But Molycorp relying upon private capital markets was not. So despite really a perfect case study just in the last decade, Western governments are still struggling with how to develop and implement industrial policy that will be effective in competing with the planned national strategy in China. So we will not address the current vulnerability in today's market structure if we keep doing the same things that have brought us here. This is really confronting for the governments that do not embrace industrial intervention like the US, Australia, or the EU. But I can tell you, let 1,000 flowers bloom will not work. The rare earths industry is high capital, it's pretty small, it's actually quite a small market. You cannot do that, you just waste a lot of capital, and we don't have the technology. And guess what? China didn't do that either. I'll tell you a bit about what China did. Making a few roulette bets, you know, we think those guys will be good, let's put some money there. That won't work. And trusting the market and private capital to pick up the slack definitely won't work. Many in government sort of get that, they sort of understand it, but they just don't know what to do about it. And at Lynas, we live in this world. You know, we get invited to the dances a lot. Lots of meetings proclaiming lots of good intent, but in our experience, only the Japanese government that has actually taken really effective action. So let me tell you a little bit more about our experience at Lynas, as we have been successful, and maybe that provides some lessons for government. The discovery of Mount Weld as a deposit was originally a government survey, right? So they were doing flyovers and they discovered this magnetic anomaly at Mount Weld, which then was followed up with further exploration activity. The Lynas, as it is today, was born from an entrepreneur's vision to create an environmentally responsible supply of rare earths. And that was Nick Curtis, and he'd done a lot of work in China, in gold actually, and he saw this rare earths business and the Mount Weld, you know, this ancient volcano, it's got phosphate, and it's got niobium, and it's got tantalum, and it's got rare earths, and so could have been developed for any of these different materials. it was nurtured by geopolitics. So it was 2011. Nick was on this journey before, but in 2011, there was an escalation in investment in the business. It was sustained by government when China responded by putting the price down, and that was the support not just of JRA, which is the Japanese government funding arm, but also Japanese industry. So in the Japanese way, the government will never instruct industry on from whom they should buy. And frankly, early on, we were really a pretty lousy supplier. We were 100% off spec and 100% not on time. Yet our Japanese customers worked with us through that time. Every time that we had a new quality problem, Shinetsu or Hitachi would send somebody over to our plant. We would work together to get our laboratory methods aligned, to ensure that there wasn't, disagreement on what the measures were. And so even though the Japanese government never said you must buy from Lynas, within the Japan Inc., sort of understanding, they did. And without that support, we also would not be where we are today. Now, I can tell you that in terms of American consumers of rare earth materials, they do not have this focus. What they've done is rapidly, run to put their processing facilities inside China to get access, right? How many Apple iPhones come from anywhere other than China? So the next lesson, I would say, is that we have relied on multi-jurisdictional operations. As I said, if we had not been in the low-cost environment in Malaysia, which also has the benefits of being close to customers, which, if we were doing all the processing in Australia, the ability for our customers to come to site to work with us on developing new products or new methods would not work in the same way. But that gave us our cost muscle, right? And if we're going to go into battle, we need muscle. And that comes from costs. And then finally, there was the guts, determination, and just plain bloody mindedness of our Lynas team. We have an interesting culture. We don't just want to win. We actually have this morbid fear of losing. So even as we were, sort of halfway down the bird's neck, we're still fighting. Yes. So, and it's a funny collection that managed to have this, that we're all very much the same. So as we think about market structure, then what are the lessons? Well, first, supply. You actually have to have an economic resource, which is what we have at Mount Weld. But that was no use if we didn't learn how to process it. That took us 3 years from start-up to nameplate. And, both your funders and your customers need to be patient through that time. Cost matters. We need to be able to survive even when the price was painfully low. And don't believe that customers will pay a premium, right? And if they do, it will be small. So our Japanese customers do pay a premium, but still, when the market price is low, so is our achieved price. And finally, governments, Western governments, need to get over their ADHD, right? When you think about dealing with this, the Chinese have done this on a generational basis. We're fortunate if we get, in the US, 2 years of policy out of a 4-year term, yeah? So we will never be successful if we don't do that. So the demand for rare earths is growing rapidly. 2020, the market only grew by about 3%, 2021 by about 19%, 2022 by about 22%. And generally, industry forecasts say it will double by 2030. For every 10 million cars that move from being ICE to battery electric vehicles, it requires about 7,000 extra tonnes of NdPr, which is about our current production. Right, so this is a big, big growth ahead of us. So government actually needs to get this right, and currently I see little evidence of this because it's just not in their DNA. They're excited about the many projects, those 1,000 flowers blooming, and keen to believe that private capital will support market development. But for all the talk over the past 10 years, we have 2 miners, Lynas in Australia, MP Materials in California, and 1 producer, which is Lynas, because the US material gets concentrated and shipped to China for processing. Right? Wouldn't it be smarter if we looked at what the Chinese have done successfully and copy that? Yes, I know, but he can ask one less question. I still have 2 minutes and 42 seconds. So what did China do that we could copy? I think the first is the benefits of critical mass. China has been able to create critical mass in Baotou in Inner Mongolia. It is fully integrated from mine to advanced motor and will be ultimately automotive there as well, I think. In the West, we scatter our facilities all over the place and then wonder why the logistics costs make them uneconomic. Governments can help by developing more shared infrastructure in which different minerals processing firms can actually locate. I always try to give a problem but a solution. This is a really easy solution. Create a precinct in which you have reliable renewable power sources, the reagents which are required for the processing, and you will get people come to operate there. R&D, because I'm at a university, Baotou's research institutes are both fundamental and applied. Outside, they have, to my knowledge, over 100 rare earths PhDs working in that jurisdiction. I haven't met even 5 PhDs in rare earths outside of China. So that gives you an idea, people like to talk about, but China's a bit basic, or they don't do this well, or they don't do that well. I'm telling you, you can eat your dinner off the floor in the Baotou facility, and their technical understanding is, and process as well as product innovation is absolutely top of the class. Outside of China, when governments say, how can we accelerate this? Well, the simplest thing would be to tell us to share our IP. Am I going to do that? No, not so much. Because there is no incentive to do so, right? We would do that, maybe. But no, there is no incentive. Trickier are the market dynamics, but if private capital is expected to support development, then governments need to consider supply and, even more importantly, demand-side policy. I forgot to actually show. That's a good slide too. Just, listen to me, but have a look at it. It actually shows how China has dominated the value chain, and I was supposed to click over to it about 3 pages ago. So in China, that they can control supply and demand-side policy with a combination of quotas and taxes. And the government is really expert at sending messages about when to put the price up or down. In Japan, it's implicit, as I talked about before. But in the US and the EU, customer buying behaviour does not support industry development. The Inflation Reduction Act is a real attempt at influencing this, but initiatives are few and far between. Unless Tesla, GE and Apple are prepared to support outside China suppliers, efforts to diversify supply will not be successful, right? Markets are always made from the demand side, not the supply side. So even when you think about things like, say, illicit drugs, we've had 50 years of trying supply-side control. It doesn't work. It only works when you actually deal with the demand side. And that is the same in every single market. That's just one of the best examples of it. So not one of those companies that I mentioned will pay a cent more for sourcing outside China, despite our excellent ESG credentials. And in fact, most want a discount. They say, oh, we'll write 10-year. How much of a discount are you going to give us? And we're like, none. We're 100% on allocation at present. So I've used my time this morning to speak about Lynas and rare earths. Not surprisingly, that's my job, it's my passion. As I said earlier, not all critical minerals have the same challenges and therefore may have different answers. Dealing with the issues of child labour in the DRC is very different from facilitating downstream production of lithium hydroxide in Australia. However, in my view, there is a single shared challenge. For each mineral, the supply imbalance has been the product of many years of policy settings and actions or inactions. China has developed its dominant position by focusing on a single strategy and executing with discipline. Western governments will have to embrace more interventionist thinking if they are going to address decades of underdevelopment. And it just may be that the recognition of the importance of developing new energy sources provides the impetus for that thinking. If not, I fear we will see a lot of capital wasted and our reliance on singular supply chains undiminished. At Lynas, we're up for the challenge. We're investing in additional capacity. We will have 2 times throughput by 2025. We're engaged with government, Japan and the US for investment, and we're committed to transitioning our own resources, energy sources, to greener solutions. Most importantly, we are ensuring that we as an organisation are match fit. That's implicit in our values, safety, ensuring our people go home safely every night, achievement, we don't really do underachievement, making sure we continue to develop technical excellence, that we are leaders in the technology of what we do. Diversity, absolutely, recruit from 100% of the talent pool. You will have a higher performing team than if you only recruit from 50% or 30% of the talent pool. And sustainability. Right? We cannot be producing the materials that we produce for the purposes for which they're produced if we trash the environment as we go. It's explicit in our capital investment program. We're spending $1.2 billion over the next 2 years. It seems that every project comes in slices of $500 million. But ultimately, it is about our people. We have a lot of our staff who went through the tough times, who've proven their resilience and developed skills and IP. And as we grow, we add more to that core group. Since I am at a world-famous university, I will start with a plug for more attention on minerals and mining and minerals processing. We're going to need a lot of new mines and minerals to support the energy transition. Apparently, mining engineer is not as sexy as quantum computing, but I think it should be. Within our company, we're very focused on developing young talent. In Malaysia, we have a vision for a graduate from every village. We sponsor these kids from when they're in about year 11. One of our real gun young process engineers was part of that program. She did that, she went to university, she did her internship at Lynas, and now she's working for us full time. I see great times ahead for our company. We have a rich man's challenge today where we have more demand than supply, and that's why we are progressing our big projects in Australia and the US. We're confident we have the skills, we have the IP, we have the experience and the people to be successful. It may be that this is enough to address the supply chain vulnerability, at least in the short term. But developing a larger and more vibrant China supply chain will need more than Lynas. And doing that will require governments to be more creative than they are today.
Thanks, Amanda. So I hail from the same place in Australia as Amanda, and my longest friend is the guy who commissioned that plant. So we spent a lot of years drinking red wine and talking about the challenge of getting that facility going. But I have a question for you, and I've followed the Lynas story from the early 2000s, so I saw it nearly go. But in 2014, when you were appointed, the headline in one of the financial press was, Lynas appoints a CEO from the telco industry. What would you know about rare earths? And then you've taken on a company, A, that is deeply in rare earths and also deeply in geopolitics, and headlong into a battle with the Chinese for the next decade.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, okay. Yes, indeed. There was this headline that said, what would she know about rare earths? And I just said, well, no one was born knowing about rare earths, so I guess I'll learn just like everybody else. And by the way, I'm sort of smart, so I think I'll learn fairly quickly. And, you know, I think this is important. I'm here at a university having an inquiring mind. And once again, we talk about diversity. If we only had people who knew what that was known at the time, then we wouldn't come up with novel solutions. Diversity is about gender, but it is about ethnicity, it is about age. We have some old blokes, we have some young ones, you know, it is about industry experience. All of these things mean you have richer discussions at the table. And so when I arrived, yes, indeed, Lynas was on the edge of the cliff, just, you know, going down, and everything was broken. We had no money. Our lenders wouldn't talk to me because they felt they'd been lied to. We were burning cash. I mean, I was really wondering whether we could afford to put coffee in the staff room, seriously. I mean, and that is not an exaggeration or puffery. We had a $1 billion plant that didn't work. We just, you know, everything was broken. There was nothing that I could rely on to sort of say, well, I don't have to think about that. Why did I do it? I don't know, I was feeling a bit blonde that day, maybe. I came in as a non-executive director, and after 3 meetings, it became really important there was a problem here. So I had 2 options. I either had to resign or I had to put my hand up to be part of the solution. For me, and you know, for a lot of people, you know, and a lot of women in particular, we look for purpose in what we do. And for me, I get a great deal of satisfaction out of achievement, but I get my joy out of seeing people do things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And so for mine, the people in the business had been working really hard and not succeeding. And that's tough. You know, it's really tough if you go to work and you're really putting your biggest effort, and at the end of the day, it's not working. And I thought they deserved someone to do battle for them, because if the business went bust, it was not the fault of the young guy working on the tunnel furnace in Malaysia, but he would surely lose his job, and there are no golden parachutes for them. So I did it against my best determination when I first came in, but nonetheless I did it. It was great. And about 18 months ago, when we had things fixed, we had an analyst day, and one of the guys said to me, how many of these people did you have to bring in? And I said, well, none. I mean, I couldn't ask anyone to leave a good job and come and work for us. We were on the edge of the cliff. And he said, so what, did they always know the answers? And I said, yeah, probably, right? Businesses don't get into trouble because no one in the business knows the answer. It's because it's not actually being uncovered and harnessed. And so either the people who knew the answers weren't being asked, weren't being listened to, or probably more, weren't being asked the right questions. Often people know the answer, but it's not the answer they think they know. And that's why we come back again to this idea of diversity of thought, is if you've got people who are asking questions through a different lens, from a different perspective, that's when you get the different answer and the magic occurs, right? So coming in, that was what it was all about. For me, it remains, you know, my number one duty remains to my people who work in the business, and making sure that, I always talk about this, making sure they have a job. So if that means ponying up against the Chinese, absolutely. Making sure they go home safely every day, making sure they have more skills when they leave than when they join, and making sure that when we are prosperous, everyone shares in the prosperity.
Have we got some questions from the floor? There's a set of microphones running around. We have one here. Probably only have time for one or two.
Hi, my name's Eben Downey. I'm a PhD student here at the School of Public and International Affairs. I wanted to ask about environmental impacts of mining for rare earths. You know, there have been local officials in southern China who've said that remediation from the projects that or the artisanal mining that was going on there for heavy rare earth metals, including a lot of the magnet ones you were mentioning there, could take about 50 to 100 years for us to be able to handle. Part of the reason that Chinese capacity ended up moving to Myanmar, to my understanding, at least for heavy rare earth magnets, is because of those environmental concerns, where basically just the people doing them in South China went to Myanmar, where there was less concern locally about those impacts. So I'm curious from your guys' perspective how we handle that challenge in trying to scale up projects in the US, in the EU.
Okay, so it's an interesting question. And I think I'm speaking to scientists, so you would know that oftentimes the headlines don't actually reflect the science. And indeed that is the case with much of this. But the first thing I would say is that every industrial process, every mining process, every industrial process creates residues and wastes. Every industrial and mining activity can be operated safely and sustainably or not. It is a choice as you do it. So if you have an industrial facility, you will have, as we do in Malaysia, you have solid residues, you have liquid residues, and you have gaseous residues. You know, you can choose to treat those, and the way to do this is that you make sure there is no pathway for those waste streams to find its way into the surrounding environment. So we treat our water, for example, 4 times before it gets discharged. And in fact, the local DOE says that the water downstream of the industrial estate we're in is better quality than the water that comes into it because of the various treatment processes. You know, so simply understanding how to make sure that what you're doing is contained and operated on a sustainable basis is critical. In terms of the Chinese industry, yes, Northern Rare Earths, which is the dominant company, 20 years ago, you wouldn't want to walk there, you know, it was done without the same focus. Today you can eat off the floor, right? Now, particularly the southern Chinese materials, from the southern ionic clay deposits, they tend to be very, very low grade, so less than 1% REO, whereas, say, for example, our hard rock deposit in Mount Weld grades across a 25-year mine life at about 8.8%, but it's much higher than that for what we're mining today. And so one of the ways that that has been done, which is completely atrocious, is that they find a hill with rare earths. They pump ammonium sulfate into it, which leaches the rare earths out, and they have a big blue canvas bag at the bottom where they collect it. And a lot of it's been illegally operated over time, And so therefore there's been no remediation, no activity to actually fix it. So yes, indeed, that is an issue, but it doesn't have to be. You can do an in situ leach, you know, there are alternatives. Then in terms of the radiation, right, rare earth mining and processing doesn't create radiation or radioactive materials. So our material comes out of the ground, it's in an iron phosphate deposit, which has got about 6 becquerels per gram of radioactivity, which is about the same as a phosphate fertiliser or the granite bench top in your kitchen, right? We process the material, we strip away that iron phosphate, and our residue has about 6 becquerels per gram of radioactivity. So it's one of those things that people say, radioactive, oh, shock, horror. The earth is radioactive, our bodies are radioactive, bananas are radioactive, you know. Let's understand the science rather than just, you know, the headlines.
And we don't have time for any more questions, but Amanda's going to be with us all of the day, and so during lunch breaks and breaks, feel free to connect. But in the meantime, it's a fascinating story. I've followed it from the beginning, and I really thank you for coming. It's a long way to come from Australia.